Peterborough, 1974. The Nipro chemical plant explodes. This woman described the disaster 5 hours before it happened. Chicago, 1979, the crash of American Airlines Flight 191. David Booth claims he foresaw every detail in his dreams. Can some people really see into the future? April 1912, the Titanic tragedy was also predicted. What can explain such knowledge of things to come? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communication satellite, the writer of 2010, and now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
I've never had a premonition, and I rather hope I never do. But they're quite common, and a very good example occurred to a good friend of mine many years ago here in Sri Lanka. He was in charge of a brickworks here in the jungle, and one day when he was leaving for his office, the foreman came up to him and said, "Please, master, drive carefully. Something bad is going to happen." So my friend drove carefully, and nothing bad happened. However, when he got to his office, there was a message, "Please return at once." When he got back to the work site, he found that the foreman, the man who just warned him, was dead, killed in a freak accident. There'd been blasting at a quarry almost a mile away. A stone had been hurled this unprecedented distance, passed through a small gap in the roof, hit the man on the head, and killed him instantly. So he had seen an omen. What he had not seen was that it forecast his own death. Such cases are quite common and very puzzling. But do they really foretell the future?
Chicago, May the 25th, 1979. Minutes after the crash of an American Airlines DC-10. 273 passengers are dead. The disaster shocked America. Yet 10 days earlier in Cincinnati, David Booth had foreseen it in a dream.
I looked up in the sky and there's an American Airlines jet. I don't know what kind it was. I didn't know planes that well. And the first thing that struck me about it, you know, where I was and looking at it, was that it wasn't making the sound that it should. You know, for being so close to me, it should be louder than it was. It was flying like this, and then all of a sudden, it goes like this. It turns over on its back, and then goes straight down on the ground.
He woke up one morning and he was in tears, very nervous, very upset. And I said, "Well, Dave, what is wrong?" And he says, "I've had this dream." He says, "I don't know where it is or what's going on." He said, "But the plane goes up in the air," and he says, "then it banks off to the right, goes down nose first, and explodes." And he says, "Everybody gets killed." And I said, "Well, Dave, it's just a dream." You know, I said, "Don't let it upset you. You know, everybody has dreams."
And I thought about it all day, and, you know, what can I do about it? And I went home that night, and normal, everything. Went to sleep. Next day, it happened again. You know, and I woke up. I didn't cry this time. You know, I'm saying, you know, uh-oh, you know, what's going on here? Kept going on every night.
Paul Williams of the Federal Aviation Administration was telephoned at Cincinnati Airport by a distraught David Booth on May the 24th. He remembers that phone call, the day before the crash.
In his dream, what he reported to me was that the aircraft suddenly turned sharply to the right and then dived into the ground. And he described in great detail the explosion that he saw, and every time he described that, he became quite distraught because it was almost as if he was seeing death.
The next night, David Booth saw this film of the air crash on the television news.
The first thing that came on was the air crash in Chicago. You know, I'm looking at it, and I lost it then. You know, I'm looking at this thing, you know, this is what I've been dreaming about. You know, the whole thing.
And I looked at Dave, and it was just like he turned white as a ghost. He was, you know, it was almost like in shock.
Pictures snatched by an amateur photographer show how the plane crashed. It had lost an engine and rolled over before hitting the ground and exploding. When he learned the facts, Paul Williams realized that David Booth's dream was uncannily accurate.
The coincidences between what David Booth told me on May 24th and what actually happened on May 25th were the airline was exactly correct. The type of aircraft was as he described, a large aircraft with an engine on the tail, which a DC-10 is. The aircraft was not making the right sound, and he described that to me on May 24th. Perhaps the most remarkable coincidence of the whole thing was the similarities of the maneuver that the plane made. It's a very unusual maneuver for a plane to make before crashing. Most of them crash with wings horizontal. They run into some obstruction, a mid-air collision, but the maneuver that David described was very unusual. As a matter of fact, it's the only one I've ever heard of a plane that size.
Does Williams believe David Booth had a vision of the future?
All I can say is I don't know. If David told me the plane was going to, a certain plane was going to crash, I certainly wouldn't get on the plane.
14 years before the Titanic sailed on her maiden voyage in 1912, writer Morgan Robertson had forecast her fate in a novel. Like Titanic, his ship, the Titan, hit an iceberg and sank. One passenger on the Titanic believes a premonition saved her life. Eva Hart, 7 years old in 1912, was emigrating to Canada with her parents. But her mother was convinced the ship was doomed. She begged her husband not to go on board, but he confidently brushed aside her fears. Eva remembers her mother's last-minute plea.
When we were going up the actual gangway to get on this ship, she made yet another plea with him not to go. And he was carrying me, he turned and looked at her, and he said, well, this is ridiculous. He said, if you feel as badly as that about it, perhaps you'd better go home to your mother, and I'll go on my own, and you can follow when you see I've got there quite safely. And of course, she wouldn't do this. And so each night she would change her clothes from whatever she'd been wearing for dinner in the evening and get into a warm woolen dress and her shoes and everything and sit down in the cabin to read or to sew or knit and remain wide awake the whole night. And on this particular night, when this dreadful thing happened, she'd got this glass of orange juice on the table by the side of her bunk, and she said it was